noticed a few condoms missing in the pack, but acted like he didn't know. A few days later, I've been cheating on my husband for a few months now with an old time friend, and I didn't think he would notice. I thought I was being smart, but never knew he knew all along, but pretended not to know anything about it. My husband noticed some condoms were missing from the pack, and he's about to take the worst revenge on me. At this point, I don't really know what to do right now. I'm writing this so you guys can give me advice on what to do to make peace with my husband. I really don't want to lose him because he is a good guy, and I regret what I did wholeheartedly. I wish I could turn back the hands of time and right all the wrongs and go back to the way we used to be as husband and wife. My name is Mayer. I am a 27-year-old store attendant. The name of my husband is Paul. He is a 29-years-old engineer. My husband and I have been married for 5 years now. Paul and I met back in school. After graduation, he furthered his education, but I didn't because I wanted to discover my talent. I had a passion for styling, so I ventured into it. I haven't gotten a store of my own, so I do work for someone. Ever since Paul and I got married, he has been supportive and has been helping me to pursue my dreams. Guys, talk about a supportive guy, then Paul is the right one. Sometimes I wondered how I was lucky to have been married to such a good man, but I messed up real good. I know you all would be wondering if actually Paul was this nice. Why did I end up cheating on him? Well, along the way, I felt like it wasn't enough. I started seeking love elsewhere, and I found one. But wait, guys, at first it wasn't intentional. Yes, it wasn't. As much as I wanted to be loved more, I didn't think it would lead to me cheating on him. Paul is never the type that does keep late nights. In fact, his job doesn't require him to come back late. Paul is also not the type that does hang out with friends, or rather, let me say, my husband is antisocial. We're 2 worlds apart in terms of social activities, but we still ended up marrying each other. Sometimes I look back and ask myself why we didn't thoroughly talk about these indifferences before getting married. If we had, maybe we wouldn't have gone this far in our relationship. Well, that's not the point right now, guys. I honestly regretted what I did, and I wish I could take it back. But I guess I can't, so I will have to deal with this guilt. Guys, my behavior with Paul changed when I started working at my store. I did keep late nights because of the nature of my job. Sometimes Paul often falls asleep before I get back home. That was how bad it was. Yes, we did have a lot of misunderstandings because of this. At one point, it even became an everyday routine. My husband and I could go on days without even talking to ourselves because of that. During our heated arguments, I never tried to understand his own point of view or see what angle he was coming from. Not like he also didn't have his own portion of blame to share, but I just realized that most of the things we both quarreled about was 80% my fault. If I had taken time to understand it, maybe I wouldn't have ended up cheating on him. So guys, what's even annoying Paul about my infidelity was the fact that I cheated on him with my old time school friend. His name is Mike. Mike and I were friends even before Paul and I got to know each other, but we never dated. We were just mutual friends, and most of our colleagues then knew about our friendship. Mike and I were so close, but didn't get to the stage of dating ourselves. We lost contact after graduation because Mike and his family relocated to another country. So guys, just like any other morning, I prepared myself and went to work. We had a very hectic workday because we had a lot of customers coming in and out of the store. We even made a lot of sales also. That particular day, when it was almost time for my shifts to end, a customer walked into the store. At that time, I was at the counter trying to add some figures together before heading home. Just then, I heard someone scream my name. I looked up to see who it was because it was a familiar voice, and someone who knew me that much could call out to me in that way. Immediately, I raised my head up to see who it was. Guys, you all wouldn't believe it. It was no other person but Mike. I screamed and left the counter and hugged him. Mike and I hugged for a while. I was so excited to see him. We chatted for a while before I asked him what he came to town to do. Mike told me he came to the store to get some clothes when he came back to town. Apparently, Mike got into town then because he was on a work trip and would be spending 3 months in town. Honestly, guys, I was very happy to have met him then. Mike didn't also fail to show his excitement either. He also asked me to help him pick up some nice clothes, which I did. It took us a while, and by that time, my shift was already over. We left the store together and we went to a nearby restaurant to hang out. We got into the restaurant and made orders. Before the orders could arrive, Mike and I had already started chatting about a couple of things. I could remember the shock on his face when I told him I was married. He didn't believe me, not until I showed him some of my pictures with Paul. It was then Mike knew that I was serious about being married. What even shocked him the most was when I told him that Paul and I have been married for 5 years. He shook his head in disbelief and said I was just kidding, LOL. I expected that from him because he didn't know anything about Paul before he relocated to another country. Nevertheless, Mike and I had so much fun chit-chatting. I also asked him what he came to town to do after 5 years. It was then he told me he was on a work trip and just came to the nearest clothing store to his hotel where he had lodged to pick up a few clothes. At that time, Mike was a businessman working for a company. I also asked if he was married, which he bluntly shook his head and told me he wasn't and not ready to settle down at that time. I knew Mike so well. He was a playboy type back in school, and he's the type that doesn't take relationships seriously. I would always tell him that any lady that would agree to settle down with him should be ready to have more than one heart because he is such a heartbreaker. Mike laughed so hard to the point everyone at the restaurant began to stare at our table. It was then I knew going out with Mike is so much fun. So guys, our orders came and we ate to our satisfaction. We stayed for a few minutes before we headed out of the restaurant. The night was still young, and so we decided to go have some ice cream before going home. That was what I needed at that time. I wanted Paul to already be in bed before I got home because I didn't want to banter words with him. So guys, Mike and I went to a nice ice cream stand and had different flavors of ice cream. We walked around the street not too far from where we had parked the car. Way back in school, Mike and I often hung out together to the extent people thought we were dating. We were that close, and were still close after he came back to town. After a few minutes of walking, my phone was already buzzing as usual. It was Paul calling. I didn't pick the cue call because I knew what he wanted to say. Mike didn't notice because he was carried away with what he was telling me. Not long after, we planned on retiring for the night. It was already past 10 p.m. that night. Mike proposed to drop me off, but I declined because I didn't want to stress him, and I knew Paul would be up so as to not give my husband another topic to banter on that evening. We hugged and he drove off. Not long after he left, my taxi came and picked me up. It was a 20-minute drive from the ice cream stand to my house. I got out of the car, paid the cabman, and headed to the door. When I got inside, Paul wasn't asleep. That night, he decided to do something unusual. Paul is never the type that likes watching TV, but that night he kept himself busy watching some TV shows. We greeted our usual greetings, and I went inside the room to freshen up. After I was done, I laid down on the bed and retired for the night. I was too exhausted to even eat what Paul had prepared for me for dinner and slept off. The next morning, my husband had woken up before I got out of the bed. I was too exhausted from last night's hangout with Mike. I hurriedly went to the bathroom and freshened up before joining Paul downstairs. It was the weekend, and we usually don't go anywhere except spending time with each other at home. But that weekend was the first day my infidelity with Mike started. Apparently, Paul was called for a contract unplanned and had to leave the house. I was all left alone in the house when Mike called and said he wanted to visit me. I was very excited because I saw nothing wrong with him coming over. However, I was feeling sad because I wanted to introduce my husband and Mike to each other, but nevertheless, I didn't think much about it. Mike came over to the house a few hours after Paul had left. My husband wasn't aware of Mike's coming because he had stepped out before Mike called and said that he wanted to come over. It took Mike some struggles before he could locate the house, but still came anyway. We chatted and watched a few TV shows we watched together back then in college and even made lunch together. That day, my husband called and said that he wouldn't be able to come home until dinner, and so Mike and I had the house to ourselves. The atmosphere was lively and we had fun. Guys, Mike and I were just talking about our old college days when Mike kissed me. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around what just happened. I was surprised at that moment. Before I could say anything, Mike told me how he had wanted to do it for a very long time but was scared because I might reject him. In that state of shock, I was finding what to say to him. Just when I wanted to utter a word, Mike kissed me. This time it was intense and we had fun together. A few minutes later, Mike slept off and we both were on the couch. At that moment, I was thinking about what just happened. I felt guilty for cheating on my husband, but at the same time happy because I just made out with my longtime friend. Guys, I had mixed feelings about that incident, but at the end of the day, I was all right. I quickly got up from the couch and freshened up and cleaned up the sitting room before Mike could wake up. Mike slept for about an hour before he woke up. I was shamelessly there staring at him and waiting for him to wake up. When he opened his eyes, he saw me staring and he smiled. Mike asked me how I felt about what had happened between us, which I told him I was okay with, and we kissed. A few minutes later, Mike stood up from the couch and had him freshened up. Not long after, we hugged and he left. Later that day, my husband returned back from his emergency work. It was past 11 p.m. that day. He promised to come back at dinner time, but he couldn't because he was stuck where he was. Paul had never stayed outside that long ever since we got married. It was unlike him. And so to make it up to me, he bought me some flowers and gifts. To say I was shocked, guys, is like I'm exaggerating. At that time, I could count the number of times my husband had given me gifts or flowers. He stopped being romantic after 3 years of our marriage. I felt guilty collecting those gifts from him because of what I had done with Mike. Guys, my conscience was killing me then. At some point, I thought of calling my husband to tell him about what happened in his absence, but I couldn't. I slept with that guilt that night. 2 days later, Paul and I were back to our normal morning routine, which is waking up, eating, and going to work. After we had our breakfast, we said our goodbyes and headed to our place of work. I got to work before my boss and set up the store for the day. Sales moved so fast that day, and we had a lot of orders coming in. I was a bit distracted because of what happened between Mike and I, and also the guilt of cheating on my husband was just killing me slowly. At some point, I couldn't bear it, and I called Mike and told him about it. When I told him, he seemed unbothered and told me not to think much about it. I yielded to the advice and I moved on. Due to the hectic work schedule, we closed late and I went home. 2 weeks later, Paul and his friends planned a 1-week holiday somewhere far away from town. They usually do that twice a year. It was their way of hanging out together and relieving themselves from work stress. My husband told me about the trip and was happy and excited. He told me 3 days before their movement. I helped my husband and packed his clothes and what he needed for the trip. I even packed extra clothes for him in case they wanted to stay longer than they planned, and also made a few snacks for the boys like I usually do every year. This year, I didn't know why I was very excited for the trip. My husband had to ask me why I was overexcited and if everything was okay, which I told him I was fine. The day of the trip came and Paul was set to go. I even escorted him to the airport where we waited for about 30 minutes before the rest of the crew came to join us. We chatted for a while after doing all the necessary requirements that were needed at the airport. My husband and I even took pictures together. At some point, I got a bit emotional because I was going to miss him, lol. So guys, a few minutes later, Mike and I said our goodbyes and left the airport. I won't lie, guys, I was a bit emotional. I couldn't stop asking myself why I was feeling that way. I headed home straight and rested for that day. I didn't go to work because my boss had given me the day off so I could prepare my husband for his trip. I didn't call Mike that day to tell him that Paul had left because I wanted to be alone for that day. I kept myself busy with some of the work I didn't finish the previous day and also did a lot of cleaning. After I was done, I listened to some good music and treated myself to some homemade food. Immediately, Paul arrived at their destination. He gave me a call to let me know. It took them about 3 hours to land. From the airport to the hotel they booked, Paul gave me all the details. We were on video call all through. It felt like we just started dating at that time. Most of Paul's friends teased him all through the time we were on video call. We talked on the phone till it was late in the night. At some point I slept off. Honestly, guys, at that time I was very happy. The next morning, as usual, I got dressed and went to work. I did my normal routine for that day and even had to close early so as to not stay late. Just when I was about to close for the day, Mike showed up. At that time, we hadn't seen each other after what happened between us. We only talked on the phone when I told him about the guilt and Paul's trip. As usual, he was excited to see me. He asked about how I was, and I told him I was fine. I didn't want my boss to see him flirting with me because he had turned into an important client to my boss because of his frequent patronage, and also I didn't want to raise any suspicions. My boss knew about my marital status and also knew my husband. I quickly packed up and signed out for the day. Mike told me he wanted to take me out on a dinner date that day. We headed straight to my house so I could change into some nice outfit. After I was done changing, we went to the restaurant and I discovered that Mike had made some reservations for us. It was a nice restaurant and the corner that was reserved was very cozy and noise-free. A few minutes after we arrived, we made some orders. Mike kept on complimenting my look and the red dress I wore. I kept on blushing and smiling. At that moment, I was already getting tired. I felt like the orders were taking time to come because I was hungry and needed to eat something. The orders finally arrived and we ate. We even tried some exciting continental dishes and had lots of drinks. It was indeed a nice dinner. I had so much fun, even Mike too. After we were done, we also went to the cinema and watched a movie together, had ice cream, and did a lot of stuff. People that saw us would literally think Mike and I were a couple. We were so close to each other and people couldn't stop staring at us. After we were done from the cinema, we headed home. The fun didn't stop there, guys. Mike and I had a few shots at home and also played some games. Mike and I were literally wasted and made out throughout the night. The next day, I woke up with a banging head. My head was hurting because of the shots we had the previous night. Since that day, I have promised myself to quit drinking. I looked at the other side of the bed and I couldn't find Mike. Immediately went downstairs to look for him. Then I found him making some tea in the kitchen. He was preparing it for me so it could relieve me of the headache. I drank the tea and he told me that he would make us something to eat. Mike made spaghetti and meatballs as breakfast. Guys, a few hours into the day, my husband called to check on me. Apparently, we didn't speak the day I resumed work. He was kind of pissed about it. I didn't know what to say because I was guilty for not calling him, and so I apologized. We talked for a while and he promised to call me back later that night. I got off the phone with my husband and joined Mike in watching the movie. Guys, the few weeks that my husband was away from town, Mike and I lived together and did a lot of makeout. We went on a couple of dates, bought me gifts, and even went to parties together. Honestly, guys, I had so much fun with Mike. At some point, I was starting to think about choosing between my husband and Mike. Despite that husband was far away, he didn't stop checking up on me or making me feel special. I was loved by two men at the same time, which made me feel guilty about my infidelity with Mike. So guys, my husband's trip lasted for an extra week. They wanted to spend exactly that 2 weeks they planned, but their flights were canceled and delayed because of bad weather, and so they had to stay an extra 1 week. The morning their flights were canceled, my husband called to tell me. He was a little bit down because he had wanted to see me. I told Mike about the situation and he was happy because he would be spending another week with me. I was also not happy because I was missing my husband and I was feeling a bit of regret for cheating on him. Mike stayed with me throughout that week and he left the next week that Paul was to return back home. It was on a Sunday morning. After Mike had left, I cleaned everywhere. The house was literally a mess. I didn't have time to clean because Mike and I were too busy doing a lot of making out together. Our routine was discouraging. In the 3 weeks we had together, I could count the number of times I went to work. I skipped work nonchalantly and even made flemez excuses. My boss believed me because I have worked with her for years and I hadn't skipped work during these years, and so it was easy to convince her. So guys, that morning after I was done cleaning, I thought of attending the Sunday service, but I couldn't believe I was late as at the time I was done. Made breakfast and prepared something for my husband to eat when he arrives. I waited for hours and it felt like it took forever for him to come, and even slept off at some point. A few minutes into my nap, the door rang and I quickly got up and ran to the door. I opened the door and I saw my husband looking all handsome and I jumped on him. We hugged for long before we disengaged and we kissed. We both reminded ourselves how much we have missed each other. Paul didn't fail in getting me gifts like he promised. I was so happy to the extent I kept on hugging him. I was just too busy unwrapping the gifts he bought for me. Paul went upstairs to freshen up and change into a nice outfit. After he was done, he came downstairs to join me. We had brunch together and told me how his trip went down. My husband also told me some of the funny and embarrassing moments he had. It was nice discussing stuff with my husband. Paul and I barely do this. But one thing I was confused about was why all these happened after I cheated on him with my college friend Mike. Not just my college friend, but my best friend. Guys, to be very honest with you all, I felt guilty. My conscience was dealing with me slowly. At that moment, I wanted to open up to Paul about my infidelity with Mike, but then again, I thought of how he would react to it. At that time, I liked the new Paul. I loved the attention and everything. I didn't want to ruin the moment or turn him into a ruthless psycho. Then again, a part of me wanted me to open up and face the consequences. I was deep in these thoughts when my husband tapped me and asked if everything was okay. It was then I realized that I was lost in thought and didn't pay attention to what he was telling me. I assured him everything was fine and apologized for not paying attention. He nodded and continued what he was saying. The next morning, Paul and I woke up and decided to go jogging. We usually did it when we first got married. It was one of our morning routines, but we stopped because we got busy with work. It was on a Monday morning and it was also a national holiday, and so we spent it together at home. It was nice hanging and spending time with Paul. Guys, Paul and I even cooked together throughout that day. It meant a lot to me and to Paul especially. He saw it as a way of reviving our love. At that moment, I was very uncomfortable. My guilty conscience wanted to ruin the moment, but I kept quiet, thinking I could make amends. Paul and I lived happily together for a week. I was very happy and felt alive. During this time, Mike and I were just mutual friends. I felt guilty and wanted to end things with him, but I didn't let him know. Instead, I kept him at a far distance. One morning, I woke up and didn't see Paul anywhere around. I didn't think much about it because I thought he had gone to work. I got out of bed and got dressed to go to work also. After I was done dressing, I had breakfast and was set to leave the house. I went for my car keys, but it took me a while to find it. I found it on the center table in the sitting room. It was strange because I don't usually keep my keys there. Then I saw a written note beneath it and thought maybe it was one of Paul's usual love letters. Guys, I opened it and read what was written on it. You all wouldn't believe it. The content of the letter heartbreaking. Paul had written a letter to me telling me about the used condoms he found in the laundry basket. He affirmed that I was cheating on him because he remembered the last time we made out, which was a month before his trip. Guys, I was heartbroken and bursted into tears. I knew that I was guilty of this, and I didn't open up to him, and he found out himself. I am finished, guys. Update. Hi guys, it's me again. Have received a lot of comments, and I'm genuinely grateful for taking out time for me. I see all the nasty comments, and I deserve it all. I just want to share all that happened after Paul caught me cheating on him. Apparently, my husband got suspicious when he noticed the condoms were missing. He didn't ask me anything before he left me a note on the table that day. I waited for days waiting for Paul, but I was unable to reach out to him. I called some of his friends, but none gave me a reasonable answer. Guys, honestly, after reading that letter, I felt devastated. My world is crumbling right in front of me, guys. All means to reach out to my husband have failed. A thought came to my mind to go to the family house to tell them about my missing husband and help me talk to him, but I couldn't. I was too ashamed to go. How would I be able to face them after all I have put their son through? And my husband made it clear that I shouldn't dare show my face at the house. Right now, as I write this, I currently do not have anywhere to go. Going to my parents is a bad option because they do not want to even set their eyes on me. How could Paul do this to me? He wrote me a letter after finding out about the missing condoms. After knowing about it, he didn't even bother to have a conversation. He acted like everything was okay. I knew I had wronged him, and I terribly regret my actions. I honestly wanted to tell him about my infidelity, but I couldn't muster the courage to. I knew it wouldn't end well, and my husband didn't even make it easy for me either. A week after Paul left the house, he came back and threw my things out. He warned me not to be there before he gets home, but I didn't listen. I thought I could fix things, but the way it was, I came to the realization that all hope was lost. My husband kept on calling me a cheater and was putting all my stuff outside. As a result of this, the neighbors got out of their apartment and began to watch. Obviously, it was a thing of entertainment to them. Paul embarrassed me to the point I couldn't show my face. Honestly, guys, I have never been that embarrassed in my life. The humiliation was just too much for me and I couldn't bear it. I quickly put all my stuff together and left in shame. I had nowhere to go and I discovered I had some cash with me, and so I booked a hotel. As if the humiliation I faced at the house wasn't enough, my husband reported me to my boss about my infidelity with one of her clients, and even told my boss I do sleep with all of her male clients. My boss didn't take it lightly and she fired me immediately. Paul did not only lay a false accusation on me that I do sleep with the rest of the male clients, but also ruined my reputation. My husband ruined my only source of income. Guys, I thought that was all, but I didn't see the last he did to me coming. My husband swapped all my savings. I was at the hotel after being humiliated and fired from my place of work. I saw several debits alerts. No one had access to any of my credit cards except for my husband. Paul took all of my money and left me penniless. That money was my only hope left. That's what I used to sustain myself after Paul sent me out. I planned on getting an apartment with it once I decide on what to do, but my husband swapped everything and even froze the joint accounts we had together. I was penniless. Right now, I have no cash to even renew my hotel fee. Paul took the worst revenge on me. Update. Hi guys, I'm here to tell you guys all that went down after my husband sent me parking from the house and left me penniless. Honestly speaking, these past few weeks haven't really been easy for me, guys. Just in a twinkle of an eye, I lost my marriage, work, and my hard-earned money. I don't know where else to run to. I went back to the house to plead with Paul, but all efforts went in vain. The last time I did go, he asked the gatekeeper to throw me out and also demanded I sign the divorce papers and have it sent back to him. I thought maybe going to the house to talk to him will make him have a change of mind. I have no one to escort me to plead with my husband. My parents would not even take my calls, even if I try, because they are totally against infidelity. No friends or relatives I could go to. Most of my high school friends and colleagues from college are out of town. I'm all left alone in this place with nothing. Guys, a lot went down this past few weeks. I even went to see my Mike, hoping he would have some little sympathy for me since we were best friends. But guys, Mike was the worst of them all. After Paul sent the gatekeeper to throw me out, I immediately headed to Mike's hotel to have a conversation with him. When I got there, I asked to see Mike, and it took a while before he could come down to the reception to see me. He didn't even apologize for keeping me waiting. Rather, he demanded that I say whatever I had to say quickly because he had work to do. To say I was shocked and surprised is an understatement, guys. I couldn't wrap my head around what Mike said, but I still told him what brought me to his place. Guys, you all wouldn't believe it. After listening to what happened between me and my husband, Mike bluntly told me he can't date me or even have anything to do with me again because I was too cheap to lay with. I was too heartbroken to have heard anything from Mike. I left the hotel shamefully. Honestly, guys, hearing those words coming out from Mike's mouth pierced my heart so much that I literally wept for days. 3 days after that heartbreaking discussion with Mike, I made one of the toughest decisions of my life, which is divorcing my husband, Paul. I had no option. All hope was lost and his mind was already made up, and so I had the divorce papers signed and had it sent to him. Since then, I haven't heard anything from him. Well, not expecting anything though, because I'm paying the price for my actions. I messed up big time. I used my hands and literally destroyed everything I have built for years. I did not only lose my relationship of 5 years or my career, I also lost my parents and my family. They disowned me the day they heard about my infidelity with Mike. I thought in all of this Mike would stay with me like he also did, but I guessed I was mistaken. One of the dumbest decisions I have ever made was to choose Mike over my marriage. Paul had always been there for me, but I was too blind to have seen that because I thought he wanted me to forfeit my career. Guys, there's no need to go back and forth with this. I have accepted my fate and I have learned my lesson. Unfortunately, I learned it the hard way and I terribly regret my actions. This is my story, guys. I hope you all have learned something from this. Sometimes the people we think have our backs are the ones that would leave us when trouble strikes. Let's be mindful of the kind of friends we keep. I would be happy to hear from you guys what you think and also advise me on what to do under the comments section. Yes, I'm also ready to hear all the nasty comments because I deserve it.